Today is day 41 following our celebration of the birth of Jesus. So yesterday was Candlemas, or the feast of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. The highlight in Luke's telling of the story is this wonderfully poetic response from Simeon, this righteous and devout elder who's been waiting and waiting to encounter the Messiah before he dies. Simeon shows up to the temple that day, waiting with anticipation. Now, we don't know if he's waited for minutes or for hours or all day. We don't know when the family arrives. We don't know how he knew that this baby in the arms of a peasant couple was the new Messiah. We don't know if there were many other days or weeks or years that Simeon had been waiting, hanging out, hanging on to finally see the Messiah. We hear Simeon say wonderful and affirming things about the child, giving hope and encouragement to his parents, no doubt. And yet his last recorded words to Mary, according to Luke, are, quote, "A sword will pierce your own soul." Now, thankfully, the prophetess Anna rescues Simeon from this awkward moment of prophetic mansplaining, and the story ends on a much happier note. Now, I say that recognizing and acknowledging that as your diocesan COVID czar, I run the danger each time we gather of piercing your collective souls with the sword of science as we wait with messianic hope for the vaccines and herd immunity to save us from the Roman tyranny of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so, like Anna, I try to keep it balanced with words of genuine encouragement, though ones based in reality. But this time in our collective lives feels much more like the account in Matthew's gospel following the birth of Jesus, when the Holy Family fled to Egypt in exile. That's a much more memorable story, beginning with Magi and ending with infanticide. It seems pretty clear that there are factual differences between Matthew's and Luke's accounts of these first few months of Jesus's life. And Matthew shares no details about what happened between the time the Holy Family left for Egypt and when they returned to Palestine. But let's imagine that it was a long trip to Egypt. It's not hard to imagine that traveling to Egypt on foot with a newborn is tough. Let's imagine, as some traditions tell us, that the first big stop for the family is in the village of Pharma on the eastern banks of the Nile. Let's imagine they know there's a Jewish community there to welcome them. And so it's their last day of walking after many days with a newborn, and it's now the last hour of that long trip. And they can see the village in the distance. But that last hour to finally walk into the village takes forever. How many of you remember long car trips as a kid, or perhaps as a parent of a young child? I spent every summer of my childhood traveling from Florida to California and back on vacation. The early years were in a 1962 VW bus without air conditioning, 4.5 days each way every year. By the time I was 10, I could predict where we would stop each night. Day 3, getting through West Texas, was always tough, but the reward was always stopping at a Mexican restaurant in Las Cruces, New Mexico, founded in 1939 and still there today. And from there, it was another day and a half of desert driving before reaching suburban Los Angeles, where both sets of my grandparents lived. But even after enduring multiple days of driving through the desert in a slow metal box without air conditioning, the last hour of the trip was always the longest. Dear friends, we have been on a long, hot, slow, unair-conditioned road trip for the past 11 months. We know we're getting close to the end of the trip, but it still feels like forever. The sword of science is in our own toolbox as we finish out the winter and look forward to the spring of more vaccinations and the hope of herd immunity. And what that sword of science is telling us is that we're not as close to the end of the trip as we wish. There are road hazards ahead as we roll out vaccine distribution and keep our eyes peeled for what the virus variants may do to slow us down. And it would not be unexpected to allow our fatigue to lower our guard. While we appear to be heading downhill, finally, after a tough last 2 months, we do not yet appear to be out of the woods or mountains or desert or whatever other metaphor helps us wrap our head around where we really are. Our GPS is spotty. Our engine's running hot. We want to speed up to get there, but we risk blowing the engine or running out of fuel or falling prey to coyotes. In this diocese, we are blessed with some crackerjack resource scientists that we have availed ourselves of this past 11 months. And they're telling us that this next month or two are going to be crucial. They could be the most perilous part of the journey, given the uncertainties of the new virus variants. They want us to remember to proceed with caution, knowing there may still be some big mountains to climb that are not yet evident on the horizon. They urge us to be patient. They urge continued caution. As I've heard Dr. Fauci say, this will end at some point, but the trip could be longer if we don't continue to be careful. There are still many days ahead before this pandemic is over, even though it's already felt like the last hour of a long trip for months. But if we can keep our focus on the present, those steps that are just in front of us, then not only will we eventually reach our destination, but I believe that God will show us enough beauty and give us enough grace to make the last leg of the journey not necessarily good, but tolerable. So please, please let all of us draw whatever imaginary lines we need between our car seats so that God doesn't have to pull the van over to the side of the road to remind us to behave ourselves. God is driving the car, not the virus. And it is God, not the virus, that wants to keep us safe. And God's not afraid, and your bishops are not afraid to pull the church over to the side of the road, as long as it takes to keep us out of harm's way.